When it comes to picking a paint scheme for your miniatures, it can often be tempting to simply follow the box art. This is especially true when you're just starting out and don't yet have the confidence to go beyond an already established scheme. And that's understandable. What if the colours you pick don't work together? What if the style doesn't fit the aesthetic of the game? What if you simply make a mistake and you're already hours into a project? All of these things are valid, but it can be very difficult to progress and improve your skills if you don't step out of your comfort zone. By allowing yourself room to make those mistakes, your skills will grow and improve. But best of all, what you're left with will truly be your own. Something that is entirely unique and something that has a little bit of you in it. Now, it's all very well me saying all that, but how can you actually put it into practice? Well, I think the best way is to show myself doing the same. I'm going to step out of my own comfort zone and show you how to approach something that you might have some experience with, but not a lot. And miniatures I'll be using in this video won't be my usual Warhammer plastic kits. I have plenty of experience with their aesthetic, background and assembly, and even what those kits are made out of. Instead, I'll be looking at these Sÿenann miniatures from Corvus Belli's Warcrow game, who have kindly sponsored this video. Now, if you're not familiar with Warcrow, it's a medieval fantasy game that is still fairly young, so it's easy to get started with and catch up with everything. Warcrow is also a small model count, narrative-focused game that sits somewhere between dungeon crawlers and wargames, which makes spending a little bit of extra time to make your miniatures your own much more worthwhile. So with the miniatures chosen, what were my first steps? After preparing and cleaning up all of the parts, I was ready to make my first deviation from the prescribed assembly, and of course do a little kit bashing. Now I'm sure many of you are about to furiously type in the comments something along the lines of, "Kit bashing man does kit bashing, how is that new?" But before you hit enter, let me explain. Kit bashing is simply a technique, in much the same way that painting or basing is. The point isn't that I'm kit bashing, but rather that I'm changing the way that the model looks from their box art representation. Kit bashing is, after all, just a way to really stamp your own mark on a model. So with that in mind, how did I actually set about kit bashing these models? After all, they weren't a multi-part kit with alternative assembly options. I didn't just have a bunch of parts left over from assembling them, or even any parts from the previous kit that I'd built. Well, my solution was to shoehorn a mention of my Dead Animal Bits kit into yet another video. But in all seriousness, my only real options here were to either sculpt something new or to borrow additional parts from somewhere else. And if you're just starting out, it's unlikely you'll have that wealth of parts to hand in a bits box. So kits like my Dead Animal Bits kit, Citadel Skulls, or similarly styled accessory packs not only give you options, but also allow you to get a hold of parts without having to cannibalize other kits for them. Plus, adding parts is incredibly simple to do, and very approachable if you're new to kit bashing and conversions in general. For these Sÿenann, I began by removing one of the bull horns from the Dead Animal Bits kit, clipped away the base, and drilled a small 1mm hole into it. This created a really simple looking hunting horn that could be glued to the waist of one of the models. For the other two, I used the horns and feathers in a much more traditional way and glued them to the head and neck respectively. Again, just incredibly simple modifications that immediately make your miniatures a tiny little bit different from their original model. Speaking of bases, this is another area that is ripe for customizations, and you massively change the vibe of a model with just a few simple additions. I imagine these Sÿenann as being vengeful forest guardians, brutally culling any interlopers into their woodland realms and leaving their bodies to be absorbed into the roots and foliage. I achieved this effect by gluing some chunks of torn up cork around the models to create a series of crevices before then gluing some Citadel skulls into them. By clipping and cutting down the skulls to fit and look buried, it helped to sell the effect that they had been built up over a long time. A testament to just how brutal my Sÿenann warband were at defending their lands. Once all the cork and skulls were in place, I filled in any of the remaining gaps in the bases, and once that had dried, I was able to begin painting. Naturally, when it came to the painting, I again used this as an opportunity to go against the normal colour scheme of the models as established by their box art. But again, I didn't need to do anything too drastic here. Rather than the verdant greens of spring and summer, I opted to paint my miniatures in an autumnal theme, relying on reds, oranges, and of course brown, which I decided to kick off the painting with by using some Hyrax brown spray primer from the Colourforge. After priming, my first step was to begin picking out the details, and for this, I decided to use some dry brushing. I began this process by applying a thin line of ancient forest from the Tooth and Coats range to my texture palette. I then took my Artus Opus dry brush and dampened it ever so slightly with just a tiny bit of water, just enough to prevent the paint from drying up in the bristles and causing that dusty effect. With the brush prepped, I lightly dipped the brush into the paint and worked it through the bristles using a circular motion on the palette, adding more paint when necessary. With the bristles evenly coated, I then used some light downward strokes across the model. The paint slowly left the brush as I did so, which resulted in the gradual formation of gradients between the primer and the lighter ancient forest. By focusing the application to the upper areas, I also helped to start the effect of the inner areas of the model being cast in shadow. This effect was then further enhanced with a second dry brush of the even lighter brown of Wasteland Brown. Again, I repeated the same steps as before, but focused my application to a smaller area, targeting the paint to the point that would be hit with the most natural light. These steps combined to give me a good starting colour for my warmer tones to build upon, whilst also helping to bring out those details. Continuing with the dry brushing, I next used some Wizard Grey to both dry brush the rocks across the model as well as a Ynir Darlane's wings. As the wings were very highly textured, the dry brushing made emphasizing those extremely easy. My final dry brushing step was to give the grey areas an even lighter coat of Carcharodon Grey to really bring out those edges. From here, I could begin the regular painting steps. For my Sÿenann, I wanted to create the appearance of skin that had been dusted with a pale powder, giving them an almost ghostly appearance. I created this by first painting on a layer of the very pale ivory tusk across all of the exposed skin. This was followed up with a wash of flesh wash. This flowed into the recesses to create the appearance of shadows, whilst retaining that pale skin colour. To both pick out the details of the flesh areas and to return to the pale coloration, I then used some thin lines of ivory tusk to bring out those facial features and musculature. I then turned my attention to some of the leather areas of the models, starting out with a thin base coat of Noble Steed Brown. By keeping the layer thin, the gradients created by the dry brushing still showed through, albeit with a slightly more orangey hue. These leather areas were then picked out with some highlights. I started out with some dry rust brown, before picking out just the sharpest point with some small dots of satyr brown. Continuing with my autumnal theme, I next began painting all of the leaves scattered across the models, and for these I used Berserker Red. The extremely detailed areas of leaves were then shaded with some Hallian Red wash, which helped to maintain that red coloration. The edges of the leaves were then carefully picked out with some Sanguine Scarlet, and were then finished off with some small spots of Demon Red onto each of the leaves' points. My next step was to pick out some of the cloth, feathers, horns, and other details with a dark grey. Now I had a few options here, but I ultimately settled on the warmer grey tone of Ashen Grey. These warm greys complemented the red and browns, and I continued their application with some Eidolon Grey highlights, and some Rodent Grey extreme highlights. For the skulls scattered across the bases, and for some of the stitching scattered across the models, I used some Skeleton Legion, washed them all with some Battle Mud, and picked out their edges with a little ivory tusk. The Druid model from my small warband had a few extra details that the other two didn't, the small lizard draped across his shoulders and his magical energy. To complement the reds and browns, I settled on a base coat of rust orange over these areas. Their recesses were then darkened with yet another wash of Hallian Red, before I began the highlights with Fanatic Orange at first, followed by the even brighter Orange Flare. One aspect of the original scheme that I wanted to recreate though were the markings across the skin, and the pale ivory tusk skin tone provided the perfect canvas for this. To achieve a striking red colour, I used some Blood Angel's Red contrast paint and applied it in thin lines across the limbs and faces of the models. Which brought me to my final areas to paint, the metallics. Using silver here would have broken that warm tone that I was trying to recreate, so I instead settled on a bronze appearance and used that aptly named Spartan Bronze as my base coat. The bronze was then darkened with some more Battle Mud washed over the top, before I picked out the edges with some Dragon's Gold. From here, all that I had left to do was to clean up the edges of the base with an AK Interactive flat black marker pen, apply a layer of matte varnish, and add some foliage to the base using a mixture of tufts from the Siege Scenics Autumn range, which left me with this. Here we have the completed Sÿenann with their small conversions, grim basing scheme, and resplendent in their autumnal colours. Individually, all of these changes were small, but together they created something entirely unique, and I hope that they demonstrate just how easy it can be to do this with your own models, regardless of what you collect. Even if you're setting out to recreate something with a real world or historical equivalent, there is always a little wiggle room to put your own touch onto things. It's just about stepping out of the comfort and glow of the painted models on the box and the artwork and the rulebooks. It can be scary, and you will make mistakes, but small changes can go a long way, and in time, you'll be coming up with some crazy kitbashes and colour schemes that you never thought you could achieve. Be brave, and most importantly, have fun. So, I hope you enjoyed this video. It was a little different than my normal videos, so let me know what you thought in the comments below, and as always, you can find all the paints and kits that I used in this video down in the description, including links to where you can pick up my Dead Animal Bits kit up for yourself. Now I just want to say a big thank you to Corvus Belli for sponsoring this video. Like I mentioned earlier, Warcrow is a medieval fantasy combat game designed for 2 players, which is played with a series of small units, symbol dice, and movement templates to make things easy to pick up and play. It might be straightforward to get started, but the game is far from simple, as both your positioning and the game's narrative are incredibly important. If you'd like to learn more about the world, the wonderful looking miniatures and game of Warcrow, then you can find some links down in the description and comments below. But before we go, it's time to say a huge, heartfelt thank you to all of my patrons, channel members, and supporters who allow me to keep making these videos. If you would like to help me out too, simply follow my Patreon link below or hit the join button. Just like my top Patreon supporters did, who are Now 5, Banyavrian, Berserker, Daniel Downley, George Consini Roberts, Immaterial Creations, Cornbread, Little Templar, Maciej Savitsky, Matt Brower, Molly Mork, Olden Time, Sam Sepulveda, Swedsman, and Tim. And my top channel members who are Alex Werner, Bon Johnson, Daniel Reese, Dave, Doug H, Guy Bizant, Lee Ely, Mark Taylor, Miso Pogon, Nerdington Paints, Omnitom, Philip Poyer, Ryan O'Shaughnessy, S.O. Satoran, S.J. Carper, That One Tech Priest, The Sire Acquired, and Whale Tussler. So until next time, thanks for watching, and goodbye.
Hey.